everyone who is watching this on Facebook. Jen here to introduce our speaker for today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jan White and how I met this amazing woman. I signed up for a presentation with Dana because they were talking about making virtual events, and we were just starting to plan our own event, Reveal Your Inner Awesome. And after watching this presentation, I had this huge page full of notes, and I was like, I can't believe I'm watching this now and not 2 months ago, because it's too late to implement all these tips. But I can tell you, there are probably 5 to 10 things I would have done differently for our event if I had met Jan before we started planning. And she is going to have that same impact on all of you guys today with her presentation. She is an events pro. So to give you a little bit of background on Jan, she has a business called Meetings by Design, which started in 1992 and provides effective business meeting and special event design and production. They have 15 years of successful partnerships with a range of clients like DuPont, Blood Bank of Delmarva, Quentin E. Primo Lecture Series, Rodell, Mary Kay, and Hotel DuPont. In addition to that client list, they have had events with attendees from around the world, and they have managed disasters, like international disasters. They've managed to recover from that and keep their events on track or adjust as needed. So Jan is going to have some really good insights for us today. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off. Jan, take it away.
Jen, thank you so much, and thank you to Brand Swan for having us here today. Welcome to virtual events, like live events, only different. Today, I hope you come away from understanding how live events should be approached differently, how to think about choosing a platform, and some event production tips, tricks, and uh-ohs, and how to deal with those. Just a little bit more about me personally. Yes, I'm president of Meetings by Design. We love what we do. We absolutely view that every single client's event is their Super Bowl, very appropriate for the timing this weekend, and we treat it as such. When we're not doing events, Michael is my husband, also my business partner, so we are partners in crime on this. We enjoy theater, hiking, American Revolution reenacting, and I have also had the privilege of attaining a 3rd-degree black belt in Kenpo Karate. So that's a little bit about me. Before we go on, I'd like to know a little bit more about who's here. So Jen, could I trouble you to put up our first poll, please? It should be who's here. I'm going to watch for that to come up. Tell me when you're there, dear. And if we hit trouble, we can just talk. Okay, so are you from a corporation, nonprofit, government, consultant, or other? If you would check one, please, that would be great. And Jen, let me know when you have the results, please, and if you would share those with us kindly.
Actually going to have Kelsey do that, but I am monitoring Facebook to see if we get any answers there. People on Facebook, please participate. Feel welcome to be part of this presentation.
Yeah, we are absolutely about inclusivity. Please play along.
All right, so for polling industries, everyone else is from other.
Okay, other, so we're gonna make it interesting. Also, before I continue on, I would like this very much to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, a comment, or an idea, please feel free to bring yourself off mute and ask, or put it into the chat. Kelsey and Jen, I'm gonna ask you to keep me honest, please. If I get caught up in what I'm saying and I'm not realizing somebody, interrupt me, let's talk. So events are a fact of life for any organization, and in times of COVID, events haven't stopped, but how we approach them needs to change, and how we absolutely execute them totally changes. So the one thing that hasn't changed is where we're going to start, where we always start with every event, is with objectives. Events, as anybody who's ever done them, everyone knows, are huge investments of time, energy, money, sometimes angst. So if we're going to put all of those resources out, we want to get the return on investment. And the way to do that is to define the objectives, meaning what do you want people coming away from the event saying, doing, thinking, feeling, knowing? Those objectives become the drivers. We view events as communication vehicles. The objectives are the drivers. And when I say define objectives, I mean really drill down on the language. Don't just say, oh, it's an educational event. Okay, good place to start, but better to say, this is an educational event and I want people walking away knowing this, this, and this. Drill down on the objectives. We recommend having no more than 3 because otherwise it starts becoming unwieldy. And also make sure your team is aligned on these objectives. You would be surprised, maybe not surprised, at how often I go into an initial meeting and we go around a table of maybe 8 people and ask for the objectives, and there are 17 objectives. So get that alignment, keep everyone on track. And as you move through the process, keep revisiting the objectives. Every decision you make, come back to the objectives. Ideally, that element should drive one or ideally more of one of your objectives. Also, be aware of what we call phantom objectives. There can be ulterior motives, different priorities that are going to be at work, perhaps behind the scenes. They can be distracting and even possibly derailing. So define the objectives. These are your core base. Whenever you're in doubt about a decision, go to the objectives. Does it fit? Usually that'll become pretty clear. So before we continue on, any questions or comments about objectives and how to define them?
I have an unrelated question from Facebook.
Sure.
What are the belts on the wall behind you?
Good eyes. The belts on the wall behind me are my karate belts. And I will tell you that my husband very beautifully, when I got my 3rd degree, put up that display that was long before COVID. And then when we entered this world, I was like, well, I kind of like the belts over my shoulder. So we left them. So that represents 15 years of study.
Very cool.
So other ideas, comments around what we've talked about so far?
Just a note from the earlier poll, we have a couple corporate event planners on Facebook.
Okay.
And a question coming in from Facebook just now. What's a good example of an objective?
Good example of an objective for a town hall meeting for employees across the country, to say that the objectives for this meeting are to roll out the strategic plan for the first quarter, so they come away with a better understanding of what our goals are, to roll out the strategic plan for the rest of the year, as well as to ground on how we did last year. Does that help define what we might be looking for here?
Yeah.
I see a nod. That's great.
That question was from Emily.
Okay, great. So moving on, once you've got the objectives, great. Now what we know what we want to accomplish. Now we need to talk about who should be there. And for a virtual and live, this should always be visited. You start with the primaries, the demographics, age, gender, affiliation with the organization, background, perhaps geography, perhaps culture, looking at who your audience is, who's going to benefit from what you're having to say. While you're doing that, think about what we call sweet spots and hot buttons. What's going to make this audience more receptive to your messaging? And what might be a hot button for the messaging that might turn them off? That can be as simple as an agenda order, or as with most things, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Also, as you look at these things, something that's important now that has not been important before is the comfort level and tech savvy of your audience. How comfortable are they in this environment? How comfortable would they be with a new app? Do they have the level of access that's required? Internet disparity has become a huge issue through COVID in the events world, because the level of internet available across the country and around the world is not the same. Also, access to hardware. Does your audience have the access to the hardware that's needed to interact? And as you're thinking about these lists, I know lists can be the bane of existence for some organizations, but the list tracking is critical for resolving issues, for future reference to track. So always, every time update your lists, add, subtract who maybe hasn't participated in 5 years if you're doing an annual. And as you call something really important and delicate to look for, please make sure there's no one who's deceased on the list. I've seen it. It's very painful for the family and it's very embarrassing to the organization. So please think about your audience and check those lists. One benefit in the time of COVID is think broader. We are no longer hemmed in by ballroom capacities, which are changing anyway, day by day, by geography, by catering budgets, by travel budgets. Think broader. A really great example is a program that we do every year, which is a scholarship awards program. Traditionally, it's been, the CEO and everybody in one place, and we have the parents, siblings, maybe a mentor, maybe a friend, but we're limited by capacity. This year, we went back to the clients and said, we're not limited. These are incredibly high achieving, very talented, very motivated kids. But it takes a village to get a child to this place. So let's invite the village. You can invite the coaches, the friends, the teachers, the pastors, the aunt in Wyoming who desperately wants to see but couldn't afford to travel before, or we didn't have the capacity. Think broader. You're no longer hemmed in by the traditional boundaries. Also, as you're thinking about your audience, think about what does success look like and who do you need in the room to facilitate that success. Everybody can say, oh, it was 500 people in the room, we were successful. Maybe. Are the 500 people in the room the people that you need to hear the message or can affect the change you want to do? If they can, great. But if you really need just a core of 50 to make that happen, set your benchmark appropriately and set your level of expectation appropriately. So when you go back to your board and say, we had 50 people come, they don't look at you and go, what? Set your level set, but do those analyses. And as you think about this, one thing that's a little unclear for us right now is return on invitations. In a traditional live environment, you'll wind up between 20 and 40% of return for an external event, obviously much higher if you're doing, an all hands internal town hall meeting. So your level of engagement is very dependent on the level of engagement prior to the event. In the virtual world, the rules are not quite clear yet. In some cases, we've seen a much higher return because it's right here. In other cases, we've seen a much lower return because people are getting, quote unquote, zoomed out. So it's thinking about how do you engage, think about your timing, especially if you're brought in from a geographic standpoint. If you do an 8 a.m. meeting, but let's include people in California. Well, that's 5 a.m. for them. So there better be a really good reason if they're going to get up at 5 a.m., even if they have to just, put on a shirt and come down to the computer. Also, one thing that sort of amuses us that has not changed, you still get walk-ins. You get walk-ins in a live event, you get walk-ins in a virtual event. And by walk-ins, I mean we get people frantically emailing, but I registered, but I paid. No, they didn't. But they think they did, and now they can't get in. So you still need to be prepared for walk-ins, quote unquote. Before we go on, questions, comments on audience? Looking.
This is more of a hosting question, but do you notice that more people are hosting now that it's online and it's easier to get started?
Actually, no. Some people, there's been lots of events that have pushed for the year because they want to do live.
Yeah.
So we're seeing some less, we're seeing more internals, more certainly as people are doing, the staff meetings, et cetera. But for events, for I think about 8 months, people sort of held their breath and, well, we're going to wait. We're actually starting to see an uptick later in 2021 as people want to return to a live virtual hybrid model.
Okay. I have a question about that too, but I can wait until you get into actual production.
Okay, fair enough. Other questions or comments? Okay, so let's do the next poll. Jen or Kelsey, sorry if I could oblige you. What kind of events have you traditionally been involved with or do you have coming up? These can be town halls, celebrations, fundraisers. Please, these are multiple, so check all that apply. I believe this should allow you to do that. I'll give you just a second to do there. Should have some Jeopardy music playing. What was I thinking? And Jen and Kelsey, if you kindly let me know what kind of responses we're getting, that would be great.
Sure. A couple comments from Facebook. And quick note, sure. Facebook, you are a couple minutes behind us. So if we don't see you right away, that's why. Emily says, we are in the wild west of web events. And then she wanted to know, what's the best way to know that your audience is engaged in what the message is? Okay,
good. And those are about tiebacks and evaluations. And I'm actually going to get into just a little later in the program. If you would just indulge me a bit, that'd be great. So anything else?
All right. I'm going to close the poll. Okay. In 3, 2, 1. So types of events that have been held are educational meetings, staff meetings, board retreats, and other.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of other. I'm going to have to learn to define that better. Thank you. Okay, so now we've got our objectives, we've got our audience, so now's the time to start looking at agenda flow and speakers. First rule in the virtual environment, I beseech of you, please do not pick up your traditional 8-hour conference, move over to virtual, and plop it in. It will not work. Nobody can sit here for 8 hours and absorb the content that you want to get. It just can't happen. So that being said, what we're discovering is you either need to prioritize your content or you need to break it out and parse it over several days. 2 hours seems to be the outer limit for true information retention in this environment, with around 60 to 90 minutes being the sweet spot. So think about how you either need to prioritize or break it apart. A great example is, as Jen mentioned earlier, was the Dana conference where we first kind of saw each other. That is traditional, a live event, traditionally Clayton Hall, a lot of networking as well. So instead of doing 8 hours here, we did an opening keynote on Monday. We did the breakouts Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at different times to allow for flexibility in scheduling. And then on Friday, we did the wrap up with a keynote and a panel to try to wrap up the week and coalesce all the ideas through the week. It was received relatively well. So that's one way to approach. I've got a lot of information. How do we do this? As you start thinking about your agenda, you need to start thinking about your speakers. If you have not had an MC before, I would strongly encourage you that an MC in a virtual environment is mission critical. Somebody very familiar with the organization, somebody who stays calm, can take direction very well, and be articulate in the moment. Anything can, will, and does happen. And if the technology gremlins get loose here, you need somebody who can wrangle the troops and just handle it. Also remember, some folks are great presenting live, and some folks are great presenting here. But chances are, if you're great presenting here, you're fine live. But if you're live, not necessarily great here. Some basic questions, and this may sound silly, but is your speaker comfortable and able to turn their mic and cameras on and off? This is actually a much bigger problem than you might think it would be. Can they handle sharing screens? Or are you going to want to build a master deck? Can they physically sit or stand for 2 hours? Not everybody can. And do they have an appropriate environment to present from? Meaning, do they have the internet? Do they have any noise distractions or physical distractions where they're located that's going to make it hard for them to present? Going back to what was mentioned before, tiebacks. Tiebacks are a new industry phrase that are ways of re-engaging your audience through the event, even in a 2-hour window. When you're in a live event, we've said for a long time, you really have to worry about keeping people out of 3 things when you're in a live event: out of their phones, out of the coffee station, and out of the bar. When you're in a virtual environment, you need to keep them out of their phone, out of email, off Facebook, away from the refrigerator, away from the homeschooling, away from the dog who needs a walk, away from the FedEx guy. It's much harder. There's much more distraction going on. So you want to do the re-engagement. You can see I'm using polls as a way to kind of re-engage people. You need to click on something, you need to read something. So I know you're re-engaged with the event. Asking questions. You can use raise hands and emoticons if your platform supports that. There are also some fun things you can do, and I know the windows are tight, but even a couple of minutes of fun, of joy, can really reinvigorate and re-engage your audience. So in the beginning of all this, we all started hearing about Zoom bombs, people crashing events and posting what could be very offensive information. Don't want that. But stealing this actually from a client's idea, you can do an official Zoom bomb as a surprise. For example, we had Senator Coons drop in on our MC at an event. None of the attendees knew he was coming, was not listed on the agenda. Do brief your MC, please, but it was a way to reinvigorate. We had Dana Herbert from America's Next Great Baker come in. You could have Yudi come in, or Elena Deladon, something as a surprise. Keep it fun. Also, if you're doing really content-heavy information, where you really need for them to listen, think about event bingo. And each square is a keyword you know is going to be said in one of the presentations. You have a staff member play along, so you keep them honest. You have a prize for the first, say, 5 people who say bingo in the chat. And because the staff person has been playing along, you know it's legit. They have to listen. So you're getting your content out there. Or think about something like physical, maybe a music stretch break. If you're working with really difficult or stressful information, lead a 3-minute mindful meditation. See if we can bring everybody's blood pressure down. What relates to your audience? Speakers. Actually, before we go on, any questions on tiebacks? Because I know that can be somewhat new, or about agenda. Looking. So why don't we do it this way? Jen, I'm going to head on, but if somebody has something, just say it.
Okay. Yep, we'll do.
Great, thank you. So for speakers, a lot of speaker management is very, very different in this environment. Right down to, I would strongly encourage you to revamp your speaker agreements and contracts. Part of what needs to happen in this environment from our perspective is every single speaker needs to be tested in advance in the location they're going to present from, with the equipment they're going to be presenting with. And I will tell you, quite frankly, we learned this the hard way. Yes, we had tested all of our speakers. That I knew we had to do up front. Tested this one speaker. She was great. She was from a major East Coast city. She got on no problem. We're good to go. Following week, we always have speakers get on 30 minutes in advance because life. Can't find her 30 minutes out. Can't find her 20 minutes out. Now, she has been incredibly reliable up till this point. 15 minutes out from the event, I find her, and the panic is leaking through the phone. She had neglected to tell me she was now going to be in the rural Midwest, not in a major East Coast city. Now, she had a game plan. She was going to be in a major community center. She had a room reserved. She was all good until the center got closed at 8 o'clock that morning for a COVID exposure. And this poor speaker is literally driving around with her cell phone in the middle of cornfields looking for a Wi-Fi signal. Not good. Tried to bring her on with her phone, couldn't get her on. Tried to bring her on audio only, couldn't get her on. This is where your MC comes in. Had to come on, make our apologies to our guests. By the grace of God, it was a breakout speaker that was actually presenting a second time later in the week. Told all of our attendees that if they could make that session, we'd be happy to have them. And if they could not, we would get them a recording of the presentation. Lesson learned. Same location, same equipment. It's got to happen. Also, make sure in the contracts and agreements that they know you're streaming. I can't imagine how they would know in this environment, but make sure it's in writing. And also review that you're recording if you are, and make sure there are any limitations. strongly encourage presenters to be on hardwire internet, if at all possible. If they need to go buy a cord, please do it. We'll pay you to do it because Wi-Fi is not always your friend. When we have them come on the 30 minutes early, review the platform, review the agenda flow, review the queuing, review what to do if something happens, if something suddenly feels off. And we tell them at the first whisper of trouble, do not keep it a secret. We give them a list of cell phones in ranking order of who to call. Don't keep it a secret. Don't try to solve it yourself. Let us help you. Yes, it can take time. And yes, if you're working with a production company, to test speakers can take money, but is mission critical. Questions, ideas, comments?
I don't know if this is the right time for this question, but I was wondering, so I feel like there's more hybrid events now. With
hybrid, two different kinds of hybrid. Hybrid meaning partial live in-person presentation or partial people live.
Oh, so some people live and some people virtual.
As speakers or as guests?
As guests.
Okay, that is starting to happen when you have 50 people and then you have the larger audience.
Yeah, and my question is how to do that effectively, because I did a painting with a twist class and it was great. We got the instruction, but at the same time, our angle was like up the instructor's chin the whole time. And every once in a while she would remember to like rotate us to the picture. So I'm sure there's a better way to do that.
There's a better way to do that. There's two parts to that too, if I can. So if you're going to do a hybrid guest event, make sure whoever you're going to have live and in person, there's a specific reason why they're live and the rest of your audience is virtual, unless it's a geographic reason. You don't want to get into well, can they and I can't. You make sure you're playing that way. In terms of cameras, this is where having the tests in advance and practicing how something like that will work, especially if you're trying to do camera moves, or even having a second camera switch in to go from here to here to figure out how it moves. Because yes, I actually was a guest on an event the other evening, and I don't know what the speaker did, but she was like contorted and diagonal. So we couldn't figure it out. But yes, that's where testing in advance and figuring out those camera moves and those angles, or even getting a tripod, will help you. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and maybe that's just the better equipment, because it was a laptop, it was on a table, so there was a limit to the number of angles you could do. So even a tripod would.
That they didn't practice maybe as much as they could have, because you could always add a phone camera.
Yeah.
As a way to kind of move it along.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Let's put up one last poll. Jen, if I could oblige you. How many of you have you already produced a virtual event? Really easy, yes or no? Or it's complicated? Because sometimes, yes, it can get very complicated. But it is an ever-changing landscape right now. But it is true. Jen just defined earlier, I'm hearing the word hybrid used two different ways right now. There's hybrid events where you actually have the presenters in like a broadcast studio and the rest of the audience is live. And then there's the hybrid event you were discussing where part of the audience is live and in person and the rest is virtual. So actually we're going to need to find a new industry phrase, otherwise that's going to get very confusing very quickly.
I don't know if my phrase was an industry one. What you said earlier sounded good. I'm going to use that.
Oh, good. Great. Kelsey, how are we doing? I know 30 seconds is suddenly so much longer than you think it is.
All right, I'm closing the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
And it looks like 67% of our Zoom audience has produced a virtual event and 33% has not. Okay. And we're a little bit of ahead for the Facebook, so we'll see if anyone rolls in there.
Yeah, well, I know 2 of the people watching, and one definitely has, and the other one has helped us do it.
Okay, so we've got some grounding there. Good to know. So some of this may be already preaching to choir, but let's go over it anyway. Choosing a platform. First place to start, does your organization have a mandate? And more organizations we are seeing do have platform mandates. be it Zoom, Adobe Connects, WebEx, GoToMeetings, Microsoft Teams, or Blue Jeans, which is what we're starting to see in the medical world. First thing, if you have a mandate, make sure you design your program within the parameters and capabilities of that platform. Don't get your heart set on pie in the sky, table interaction if your company says, but you have to do this in Microsoft Teams webinar, because all of that just fell by the wayside. So make sure you're playing within those. Also, if I can editorialize just briefly, I work on a lot of platforms. Blue Jeans can be tricky because there's the layers of HIPAA within it for medical, so just be aware of that. I will confess Microsoft Teams for us has been twitchy on occasion, so just be aware of that. That's a personal experience. I'm not besmirching Microsoft Teams. I'm just saying that's been our experience. But now there are literally thousands of other platforms. There were platforms before, but the whole world in April jumped on the bandwagon. We've played in Remo, Marquee, Maestro, vMix, Wirecast, Rendezvous, some other ones we haven't played in yet, but we've dabbled with, Hopin, Pathable. All of them have pros and cons about how they work, their functionality, their costs, and their capacities. And also be aware, they're all cherry picking from each other pretty much every week. So you need to continually reevaluate this. You make a decision on a platform, great. But in 6 months, you need to do it again, because chances are what was good 6 months ago may or may not be the right fit now. And again, revisit your objectives. If this is a straight educational, a Zoom webinar would be fine. If you're looking for intense audience interaction and collaboration, probably not. Then you need to look at something like a Pathable, a Hopin, a Remo, a Maestro to go that direction. Revisit your objectives. Are you going totally virtual? Are you doing the hybrid of the speakers in the studio like we talked about? Are you doing the hybrid of the audience? If you're going to settle on or think you want to settle on a platform that is outside the norms, the WebEx, the Zooms, etc., do a test, get a demo. Both of those should be free. Make sure the demo reflects what you want to accomplish. They could be showing you all kinds of bells and whistles. Do you need them? Do you want them? Do you have to pay extra for them? And then ideally, see if you can find a partner where you can attend an event that is in the platform you're talking about. There is nothing to replace being the guest and having the guest experience about how this should work. And like I said, this part is continually evolving. We keep saying we're flying the plane, but while we're flying the plane, they're designing the plane, building the plane, and while we're doing all of that, everybody keeps changing the flight path. So that's how fluid this is. Questions on platform, ideas on platform.
Question.
Yeah.
So that was a big list of platforms, but for adding kind of the game elements you were talking about earlier, in your experience, which ones make it easier to do that?
The more money, the more functionality is the best way I can put that. I have no good way to say that. The more money, the more. If you go up to like a Pathable or a Hopin, they might have the games built right in. But
Okay.
you could be paying tens of thousands of dollars for that kind of functionality. I mean, you can get fully immersive environments. If you want to do a more straightforward way to do it, you could post it into the chat, have everybody download their own and do it that way. And then they just post the winner into the chat. There's lots of different ways to approach it depending on how you want to allocate your resources.
We've got a question in the chat. Susan Robinson wants to know, what is the best type of platform for a book club type discussion?
How many people in the book club? Answer a question with a question.
8.
8. For 8, you probably could do a straight Zoom relatively easily. We usually view that up to about 15. You can still get the interactivity, but I would recommend a moderator so you're not stepping on each other. So you're actually having people recognize to speak, because Zoom, they step on each other, if that's helpful. Next. Okay. If anything lags in from Facebook, do let me know. Let's move on to the almighty budget. Everybody's favorite topic, but really important. In the beginning, everybody was saying, oh, cutting 90% of the budget because we don't need any of this. Yes and no. No, we don't need catering, but you may need platform. No, we don't need ground transportation, but you may need a production company. So the budgets are different, but we're really discovering they're coming in about the same because there's different allocations. Attention has to be paid in different places. We know budgets are important. We know perception of budgets is important. Not only does it have to look cost effective and look appropriate, it needs to feel it because that matters. Perception is reality. So please establish the parameters up front. Go back to your objectives. Make sure you have the resources allocated that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish and go from there. And like I said, the range is huge, particularly on the platform front. Zoom can be essentially free or a couple of $100 up to tens of thousands, depending on how many people and how many days and the level of interactivity. The other part I would strongly encourage you to look at is to think about doing a production company. If you have multiple speakers, if you have panels, if you have video playback, if you have PowerPoint, that's a lot to run. Yes, a production company can be an expense, but they're the ones who are making sure the signal is feeding out properly. They have the professional equipment to switch it cleanly. They even have the ability that you can put up a logo and background music if something goes up while you resolve. So it costs, but there is return. So we would encourage you to consider that. Questions on budgets?
I just want to second what you said about production company because we, at our event back in November, I was basically MC. We had the team, they were running stuff. So did we keep up with all of the questions and issues and tech things people had? Yes. Did we do any networking and generate any leads? I don't think so.
Right. You were busy running the event versus working the event.
Exactly.
Two different things. That's one of the things we always say, particularly with our nonprofits, but our corporations as well. We make it so our clients can actually enjoy their own event and work their own event versus running the event. Two different things. Others. Okay, tips, tricks, and uh-ohs. And there are always uh-ohs. We talked a little bit about watch the updates. Typically, the updates happen on a Sunday. That doesn't mean, they can't happen at any time. One we learned the hard way, fortunately in time, was that there was a significant update from a security perspective on a platform that was a mandate in a corporation. We had an A-list speaker that week. We had scheduled the test with the speaker for the Monday before the event because it was later in the week. Couldn't get in. As an external speaker to this corporation, this speaker could not get in. We had 2,000 people registered across the country, and he's our star. It meant a really fast hurry up of having to go through a production company with a different pathway to then feed the actual event. It meant getting the production company, building the entire show, and retesting every single speaker. It's a lot of work. It's a little bit of money, but without it, the program would have not happened. So watch the updates. And if you can, if your program is later in the week, schedule your speaker tests for that Monday. So if you have a problem, you have time to regroup and time to manage. Staffing considerations. Staffing is just as busy on this event as Jen was just talking about in the virtual environment as it is in the live. Ideally, you want to have somebody allocated to manage your speakers, answer questions, count noses, make sure everybody's here. If you're doing multiple rooms or breakouts, you're going to want a host for each room. Everybody happy, speaker on track, any kind of problems managing. You want an overall timekeeper. Time slips away just as easily here. You need a timekeeper. You still need someone for registration, as we said, for the walk-ins. Depending also on the size of your event, this could be your initial level of tech support. Do they have the link? Please don't think me disrespectful. Is there Wi-Fi on, or is there Ethernet plugged in? Yes, I've had it happen. Are they on the correct browser? Explorer does not play well with a lot of the platforms. Are they in Chrome or Firefox as they're supposed to? A very basic level of tech support / registration. And then you can have an elevation of tech support if you're in a custom platform for that. You need somebody to monitor the chat and to boot if needed, or to delete comments if needed. Unfortunately, there's still some of the not nice Zoom bombing going on. Ideally, this should be somebody from HR who understands the parameters of the company and would understand the parameters and ramifications of ejecting someone. Someone to be the MC, I've already talked about that. Someone to monitor Q&A, to curate them, to prioritize them, to feed them to the speaker if you're taking them live. So you still need all those pieces and parts, even though we're here. Also think about engaging in advance. People have 12,000 things to do, and it's really easy to get distracted. Keep trying to get away from paper, but in times there are good reasons to send paper. Maybe you want to send out an advance packet, a note card from the president or the executive director, an agenda. If you're using a custom platform, a tech support cheat sheet with screenshots might save you. And also think about a sweet treat. Their little kid lives in all of us, and everybody likes a treat. Is it a custom little thing of coffee? Maybe the coffee breaks on us. A cookie, some popcorn, something fun. Also, if you're using a new platform or a custom platform, think about a testing day with a door prize for participation. If you only have a 2-hour event and 25% of your audience can't get in for the first 30 minutes because they're having tech trouble, or they didn't set up their account, or they didn't set up their password, you're not going to meet your objectives. Have a testing day. Yes, time and money, but worth it for the return. And if for everybody who comes in, they're eligible for a prize. Make it fun. And they can play around with the features. They can even have lunch with somebody. Make it fun. And don't forget to use social media, promotions by speakers, live interviews, teasers, contests. And a few things we've learned along the way. We don't have photographers here, but you still want the shots. Make a shot list, just like you would for a live event. Get the shots of all of your speakers. Maybe if you have a green room set up, get a green room quote unquote shot of all of your speakers. Get the team picture. You still want those. You're still going to use those for your post-event communication. So don't forget about the shot list. Also, for anybody who's ever done a live event, when the event is done and you're flying on all that great adrenaline, everybody huddles up. There's always this impromptu huddle up, and all these ideas spill out. This was great. This was great. Oops, that seemed like a good idea. We now schedule Zoom meetings for the core team right after the event ends. So we capture all of that great flying adrenaline debrief. You still want to do the formal debrief, but it's amazing what comes flying out right in the moment. Don't lose that. That's important information. Lastly, please remember, events are like 1950s television. Anything can, will, and does happen. And I say consistently, never ever tell me I've seen it all after almost 30 years, because then God feels compelled to show me I have not. As long as you smile and keep going, 98% of the time, nobody will know, and we won't tell. That's where your MC is so important. And if there's truly a problem, ask for grace. Everyone is now understanding how truly hard this is. Ask for grace. People will understand. And remember, things happen in the live environment too. Cars don't start, planes don't fly, people get sick. It happens. Smile and keep going. So for a quick recap, Objectives, 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 objectives drive. Evaluate and analyze your audience so you have the right people in the room. Continually evaluate your platforms. Test, test, and then double check. Smile and keep going. It'll be great. Questions, comments, ideas?
I'm so sorry. I had a question and I forgot it.
It'll come back. If not, you know how to find me. It's all good.
Comment from Facebook. Love the flying adrenaline debrief.
What it is, though. Should have warned everyone. I'm WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get.
Oh, you know what? It did come back. Okay, so speaker agreements you mentioned, and I absolutely love that idea because, you know, we've just bring people on and then there's no real discussion about, you know, helping us promote or doing anything like that. But with the whole unpaid speaker, how much is reasonable to expect of them? And at what, I don't know, at what point do you start paying speakers?
Okay, let me answer the first question first. What's reasonable for a speaker, you need to ask them because everyone is calibrated differently. You know, you can tell them, these are some of the things we have in mind. Which ones would you like to participate in? Because some speakers are going to say, you're not paying me, I'm doing this and that's it. Other speakers are going to say, yeah, I'll do it. So, you know, make it individual, but also get it in writing for both your sakes, just so there's clarity on what was agreed on. You don't want the, but I thought, and you're staring at each other that day. That's not a comfortable place for anyone. In terms of when do you start paying speakers? When they ask. There's different ways to pay speakers. Certainly when a speaker asks, you need to do it. You can also ask them about, I've seen, though I don't do often, but I've seen barter agreements. I've seen donations of honoraria. There's lots of different ways to pay. So again, talk with your speakers, what works for them. There's a huge continuum on free. I mean, and I love I have so many people now who say, can we get Michelle Obama? And I'm like, we can. You need to be prepared for how many digits and what that digit starts with before because it's not starting with a 1, before we start having that discussion. So Jen, does that answer your question?
Yes, it's complicated.
Well, okay, it depends. It's always complicated, but it's also navigable. Ask. Simply ask. Next.
I've got a question coming from Facebook. Kim Wells wants to know, what platform would you recommend for an online auction fundraiser?
I'd rather chat about it offline because there's about 5 that leap to mind, and it depends on, you know, there's BidPal, there's a bunch of them out there. Again, 5 lots, 500 lots, 5,000 people, 100 people. We try to approach, I don't try to give blanket answers because that's unfair, if that helps. But I'm happy to chat afterwards if you would like to. Others?
While we give it a couple minutes for more questions, I'm going to go ahead and screen share and show Jan's information so everyone can follow her later.
And please reach out. You know, this does not need to be the end of the discussion with the contact information here. I'm an email, text, phone call away. Always happy to chat.
Yeah, we will share these links on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, you'll be able to reach out and get in touch with Jan that way. And for the people in the Zoom, we will be sharing all of this afterwards as well. We'll be emailing that directly to you.